All right, welcome back to Holy Drip Radio. I'm Chloe, and today we're going to be talking about something that truly underpins so much of what we experience, often without even realizing it. It's a profound observation that once you see it, you simply can't unsee it, and it really shifts your perspective on the cultural landscape, on language itself, and on the very fabric of our shared reality. You see, the insight we're going to dive into today, one that comes from the brilliant mind of Chris O.S., the host and visionary behind Holy Drip Radio, is this. The beast, this overarching system of control and narrative manipulation, it doesn't actually destroy truth. No, that would be too crude, too easily identifiable. Instead, it does something far more insidious, far more subtle, and ultimately far more effective. It wears it. It drapes itself in the very language of awakening, of noesis, of deep, soulful connection, and in doing so, it hollows it out, it renders it inert, and then, with a chilling efficiency, it sells it right back to us, completely empty. Every phrase, every concept that resonates deep within your gut, that feels like an echo of something ancient and true, chances are it's been lifted, it's been laundered, it's been stripped of its potency and repurposed as a tool within the very system it once promised to dismantle. It's almost like finding a beautifully crafted antique wooden chest. You're drawn to its intricate carvings, its patina, the sense of history it holds. But when you open it, you find it completely empty, or worse, filled with cheap plastic replicas of what it once contained. The form is there, but the essence has been plundered. And this isn't just some abstract philosophical point, you know?
This has real-world consequences for how we navigate our spiritual paths, our personal growth, our understanding of the world around us. Because if the very language we use to articulate our highest aspirations, our deepest truths, has been co-opted and corrupted, then how do we even begin to speak of what truly matters? How do we point towards the bloom, towards the activated mind, towards the sacred, if the signposts themselves have been twisted and turned? It's a semantic warfare, a battle not just for our minds, but for the very words we use to think and feel and connect. And understanding this, seeing this pattern, is the first step in reclaiming our linguistic sovereignty, in finding our way back to the authentic source of these powerful ideas. It's a journey, really, of discernment, of stripping away the layers of appropriation to find the kernel of truth beneath. And believe me, it's a journey worth taking. This isn't just about language, it's about the very soul of our collective and individual experience. So let's get into it, shall we? Let's unpack how this happens, how these profound concepts are systematically stripped bare, and what we can do about it.
So let's start by looking at some very specific examples, because this isn't just a theory, it's a verifiable pattern. We can see it playing out right in front of us in the very words we use every single day. One of the clearest examples, I think, is the word genius. Now, if you go right back to its origins, to the Latin genius loci, you find something truly beautiful, something deeply connected to the earth and to a profound sense of place. It literally meant the spirit of a sacred grove, the inherent animating spirit of a particular location. It was about the energy, the unique essence that imbued the place with its power and its wisdom. To be a genius loci was to be inextricably linked to the land, to understand its rhythms, its secrets, its sacredness. Why does this matter? Well, it speaks to a time when intelligence wasn't purely cerebral, you see. It wasn't just about what you could calculate or conceptualize in your head. It was about a relational intelligence, an attunement to the environment, a deep, embodied knowing that was embedded in the land itself. Losing this original meaning, this profound connection, effectively severs us from our spiritual geography, from the inherent wisdom that resides in the natural world around us. It makes us think that wisdom is solely a human construct, rather than something we can learn from the very earth beneath our feet. Now, here's the complication. Here's the beast's move. Today, when we talk about genius, what do we mean? Usually, it's about an IQ score, a measure of individual cognitive ability, often in a very narrow, analytical sense. Or, tellingly, it's associated with a brand, like the Apple Store, selling sleek technological devices designed to connect us to a digital grid, not a secret grove. It completely inverts the meaning. Instead of a collective place-based wisdom, it becomes a hierarchical, individualistic achievement, something to be measured and marketed. It's about personal brilliance over collective wisdom, human ingenuity over environmental attunement. The so what here is profound. If we're only looking for genius in a Silicon Valley startup, or a university test score, or the latest gadget, then we are fundamentally missing the profound, ancient wisdom that resides in untouched forests, in the flow of rivers, in the quiet reverence of a deeply cherished home. We're looking in completely the wrong place. We're searching for something externally, scientifically quantifiable, when its true essence was always about an internal, spiritual, and ecological connection. It's a trick of perception, a linguistic sleight of hand that has profound implications for how we understand intelligence and our place in the world. And then there's clarity. Oh, clarity. In its profound original sense, clarity was the bloom state of the activated mind.
It was about direct, unmediated understanding, an internal experience of insight, a moment where the clouds of confusion parted and you saw things as they truly were. It was something you cultivated, something you earned through practice, through introspection, through a genuine alignment of mind and spirit. Why this matters is clear. It points to an authentic internal process of perception vital for genuine insight and for navigating the complexities of life with wisdom. It's about seeing the truth for yourself, with your own activated consciousness. But what has it become? Well, now it's often marketed as a supplement brand. You can buy a pill, a powder, a potion, and it promises to deliver clarity. It completely commodifies an internal state, suggesting that this profound experience of insight can be bought off a shelf, delivered by an external agent. It misses the fundamental point that true clarity comes from inner work, from diligent self-awareness, from a cultivation of presence, not from a synthetic compound. It turns clarity into something you consume, rather than something you become. And the so what of that is equally disturbing, I think. We end up in this endless chase, don't we? We're constantly seeking external fixes for what are fundamentally internal problems. We're perpetually consuming, hoping that the next product, the next quick fix, will finally grant us that elusive state of clarity. But it never truly arrives because we're looking in the wrong direction. It becomes just another item on a shopping list, another thing to acquire, rather than a profound transformative shift in consciousness that demands effort, presence, and genuine engagement with our inner landscape. We're sold the promise but delivered an empty box. Because the beast understands that by controlling the language, it controls the perception, and ultimately it controls the path we take in seeking our own truths. And this pattern repeats itself again and again and again.
And the pattern just keeps on unfolding, revealing itself with each profound concept that we might once have held sacred. Consider the word awakening. Now, in its truest, most potent sense, awakening was about direct sacramental gnosis. It was a profound spiritual insight, often a deeply transformative, sometimes even arduous personal spiritual journey. It was about seeing through the veil, experiencing a radical shift in perception that fundamentally altered your understanding of yourself, of reality, of your connection to the divine. It wasn't something you watched, it was something you became. Why does this original meaning matter so profoundly? Because it speaks to the very core of human spiritual seeking, to that primal urge to transcend the mundane, to glimpse ultimate reality. It implies a direct, unmediated experience of the sacred, a personal revelation that no one can take from you. Losing this depth means we lose the map to our own spiritual liberation. And what's happened to awakening in our modern lexicon? Well, now it's often reduced to a Netflix special, or perhaps even more tellingly, a political hashtag. It's been superficialized, commodified, turned into entertainment, or a tribal identifier. It trivializes the profound personal undertaking, the deep inner work, reducing it to a passive consumption experience. You can binge-watch an awakening narrative, or you can signal your wokeness by using a particular hashtag, but neither of these actions demands the kind of radical inner transformation that the original concept implied. The direct experiential component has been completely stripped away,
replaced by proxies and representations. The so what of this is truly critical, I think.
When awakening becomes just a buzzword, it actually loses its power to truly awaken anyone. It's co-opted, used to sell content or to push political ideologies, all of which ultimately divert our attention away from the real, often challenging work of self-inquiry and genuine spiritual connection. We get trapped in this kind of performative wokeness, where the external display of being awake becomes more important than the actual internal transformation. It's a powerful word, filled with potential, now hollowed out and made to serve agendas far removed from its sacred origins. Now let's look at another one, equally potent. Activate your light body. This phrase, in its original context, was part of a rich tapestry of entheogenic illumination language. It pointed to a tangible, energetic shift in consciousness, an experience often facilitated by sacred plant medicines or through incredibly deep, sustained meditative states. It was about a profound inner alchemy, a transformation of your very being into a more luminous state.
The why this matters for Activate Your Light Body is that it points to a very real experiential aspect of spiritual development, where the body itself becomes a vessel for higher consciousness. It's about an alchemical process, not a symbolic one. It's about becoming more than just flesh and blood. It's about realizing our energetic, luminous nature. But what has this potent, esoteric concept become? It's been reduced to a yoga influences merch drop. This, to me, is perhaps one of the most egregious examples of trivialization, because it takes something so incredibly profound, so deeply sacred, something that requires years of dedicated practice, and perhaps even ceremonial work, and it reduces it to a branding exercise. It's a marketing slogan on a t-shirt, or on a yoga mat, or on a water bottle. It's about selling an idea of spirituality, a fashion statement, rather than facilitating the actual, arduous, and sometimes terrifying experience itself. It completely divorces the concept from its experiential roots, turning it into a consumer product. And the so what from this one is deeply disheartening. This co-option fundamentally disempowers individuals, you see. It convinces them that spiritual power or this energetic transformation can be bought or displayed through consumer choices, through the right accessories, rather than cultivated through rigorous inner practice, through dedicated self-discipline, and through an ethical way of living. It becomes a shiny, superficial distraction from the real, often uncomfortable, and undeniably challenging path of genuine spiritual development, instead of walking the path which is buying the t-shirt that says we've walked it. It's a profound misappropriation, isn't it?
And it shows just how thoroughly the beast can infiltrate and corrupt the very language we might use to seek our own liberation. It's subtle, it's insidious, and it's pervasive.
Now, we're going to dive into two more powerful phrases that have suffered a similar, if not even more dramatic fate, and then we'll look at the overarching pattern that emerges from all of this. The first phrase is, "Nothing can stop what is coming." You might have heard this one quite a bit in recent years, perhaps in contexts that felt a bit off. But in its original spiritual lineage, this was a truly potent prophetic refrain. It spoke of the returning sacrament, of a deep, inherent knowing, a trust in the inevitable unfolding of a higher spiritual truth. It was often tied to ancient prophecies, to the cyclical return of sacred knowledge, to a collective blossoming of consciousness that was destined to occur. It was an affirmation of cosmic inevitability, a deep, unwavering faith in the underlying spiritual architecture of the universe, a sense that a profound shift was not just hoped for, but assured. Why this matters in its original sense is because it offers profound comfort and reassurance. It tells us that despite all the chaos, all the apparent setbacks, there is an underlying current, a divine plan, an evolutionary impulse that is unstoppable. It offers hope and a sense of meaning in a world that often feels meaningless. The complication, however, is that this deeply spiritual phrase, this affirmation of a higher order, has been weaponized, hasn't it? It's been grafted onto specific political conspiracy theories, particularly within certain online communities, often appearing as a QAnon bumper sticker.
It's been stripped of its universal spiritual resonance and instead filled with partisan, often fear-based content. It transforms a message of hopeful spiritual unfolding, a kind of cosmic blossoming, into a declaration of political triumph or an impending judgment for one's perceived opponents. The so what here is incredibly important. This co-option takes a phrase that could unite people in a shared spiritual vision and twists it into a divisive narrative. It feeds into an us versus them mentality rather than fostering a collective spiritual evolution. It co-opts the genuine human yearning for truth and a better future, but it funnels that energy into a narrow, often hateful political agenda. It's a powerful phrase. I mean, it feels powerful, but it's been so fundamentally stripped of its original, unifying, and truly transcendent intent. And then there's the Great Reset. Oh, the Great Reset. In its authentic, esoteric sense, this phrase spoke to the return of the bloom current. It alluded to a natural, organic recalibration of Earth's energies, a profound rebalancing, a return to a state of equilibrium and flourishing. It was an ecological and spiritual concept of regeneration, a cyclical renewal inherent in the fabric of existence. It meant a natural, emergent shift, a repatterning of life that was necessary and organic.
This matters because it speaks to a deep, inherent wisdom in nature, a natural, cyclical process of renewal that applies to all systems, including human civilization. It offers a vision of restorative justice, an organic healing. But here's the inversion. This truly profound, organic, and spiritual concept has been inverted. It's been taken by organizations like the World Economic Forum and turned into a slogan for a top-down, technocratic economic restructuring plan. It takes an organic, spiritual concept and remakes it as a corporate globalist agenda, completely divorcing it from its natural emergent connotations. It's about control, you see, and centralization rather than natural flow, decentralization, and organic regeneration. And the so what of this inversion is far-reaching. It creates deep suspicion, doesn't it, around any talk of a reset, even if that reset is natural, necessary, or truly beneficial from an ecological or spiritual perspective. Because the term itself has been so corrupted, so thoroughly weaponized by a particular agenda, it now instantly triggers alarm bells for many. It transforms a potentially positive, evolutionary concept into something sinister, something manipulated, something that fosters division and fear rather than offering a path towards genuine renewal. So what's the pattern we're seeing here? What does the beast do? It identifies rising gnosis language, these powerful words and concepts that emerge from a deeper spiritual understanding, from authentic connection. Then it captures it. It takes possession of the language. Then, crucially, it empties it. It strips away the original meaning, the spiritual potency, the relational depth. And finally, it weaponizes it.
It repurposes that empty shell for its own agenda, whether that's consumerism, political division, or systemic control. Why is this pattern so effective? Because it's not about outright lies. That would be too obvious, too easily refuted. Instead, it's about subtle inversion, about dilution, about confusion. And understanding this pattern, seeing the beast's method, is absolutely crucial for discerning genuine spiritual language from its corrupted, co-opted forms. It's our primary defense mechanism, really, in this semantic warfare. Because if we don't recognize this, we might find ourselves speaking the beast's language without even knowing it, perpetuating its agenda even when we genuinely believe we're resisting it. It's a very clever trap, isn't it? Now, this pattern of linguistic appropriation and spiritual inversion leads us to a broader and perhaps even more chilling insight into the nature of control. It's what Christ OS refers to as the wipe cycle. This is the idea that every single generation that gets close to truly remembering, that gets close to a mass red-cap gnosis, that gets close to a collective awakening, well, that generation inevitably gets hit. It's a cyclical process, a recurring historical phenomenon that suggests there's a powerful, unseen force actively working to prevent mass enlightenment. It implies that awakening isn't a linear progression, a steady upward climb, but rather a series of waves, each met with a deliberate and often brutal counterwave designed to make us forget. Why does this concept matter so much? Because it highlights a cyclical nature of suppression, suggesting an intentional, almost intelligent historical pattern to how consciousness is managed. It shows us that the path to awakening isn't simply about discovering new truths, but about overcoming a persistent historical amnesia, a pattern of forgetting that has been imposed upon us again and again. It can feel deeply disempowering to realize that such a force exists, that there's this kind of systematic suppression at play, but it's also a profound call to awareness, isn't it? It challenges us to look beyond individual events and see the larger, more sinister choreography at work. The pattern itself unfolds quite starkly. Sacramental knowledge, genuine, direct spiritual insight begins to rise. People start to connect, to remember, to articulate these deeper truths, and then, invariably, a jab drive occurs, a period of intense social panic, often followed by a large-scale conflict, a world war.
And the effect of this, quite deliberately, is a wipe. Let's cast our minds back, shall we? Consider the generation leading up to the First World War. This was a period of incredible intellectual and spiritual ferment. People were reading figures like Helena Blavatsky, delving into theosophy. They were exploring Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophy, engaging with early esoteric societies, and crucially, some were beginning to experiment with what we might now call early psychedelic mystics. Though the term wasn't in vogue then, the exploration of altered states of consciousness for spiritual insight certainly was. There was a burgeoning interest in Eastern philosophies, in ancient wisdom traditions, a profound dissatisfaction with purely materialist explanations of the universe. This generation was truly on the cusp of profound shifts in consciousness, of a widespread spiritual renaissance. They were asking big questions, seeking direct experience, challenging established dogmas. Why is that significant? Because this was a pivotal moment for spiritual exploration, you see. A moment where humanity was beginning to tap into ancient wisdom and new psychological insights. There was a genuine intellectual and spiritual curiosity that threatened to unravel the dominant mechanistic worldview. But then enter the complication, the First World War. This wasn't just a physical destruction, was it? It was an unprecedented industrial-scale slaughter, a profound trauma that fundamentally altered the Western psyche. Millions of young men, the very demographic most likely to be engaged in these new intellectual and spiritual inquiries, were annihilated. It diverted the collective focus, from internal exploration, from esoteric seeking, to brutal external survival, to managing unimaginable grief, and to a pervasive disillusionment with the promises of civilization and progress. The sheer scale of life lost meant the loss of future teachers, future thinkers, future seekers, all of whom carried the potential for this deeper understanding. The so what here is chillingly clear. This demonstrates how global conflict on such an epic scale can be an incredibly effective and utterly brutal tool for derailing emergent spiritual movements. It's not just about direct suppression or censorship. It's about creating such immense societal shock, such overwhelming trauma, and such a complete redirection of collective energy towards mere survival and rebuilding that any nascent spiritual bloom is simply crushed beneath the weight of suffering. The focus becomes physical survival, not spiritual flourishing. And this wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the beginning of a cycle.
We then move into the aftermath of the First World War, and something interesting happens. Despite the trauma, there was a kind of spiritual and artistic efflorescence in certain circles. People were still searching, still yearning for meaning after witnessing such profound destruction. And as we moved closer to the mid-century, we saw another generation beginning to seriously decode the ancient mystery schools. Thinkers like Carl Jung were exploring the collective unconscious, mythologies were being revisited with new eyes, and there was a renewed interest in esoteric traditions and hidden knowledge.
People were trying to understand the deeper patterns at play in human experience, to make sense of the chaos, to find a guiding thread in the collapse of old certainties. This wasn't just academic curiosity, it was a deep existential quest, a yearning for transcendent truth. Why this matters is because post-WWI there was a resurgence of interest in esoteric knowledge, a desire to understand deeper patterns after the profound societal and spiritual dislocation. This was a generation looking for answers in the hidden realms, in the perennial philosophy, trying to rebuild a spiritual framework for existence. But as history tragically shows, another complication arose: the Second World War. This war, with its unprecedented atrocities, the Holocaust, the terrifying advent of the atomic bomb, again shifted consciousness in a profound and devastating way. The collective focus was brutally redirected towards existential dread, towards the urgent need for scientific rationalism as a supposed savior from such human barbarity, and towards a deep, traumatized questioning of humanity's darkest impulses.
This was a war that created a wound in the collective psyche so deep that it took decades, if not longer, to even begin to process. It completely overshadowed any burgeoning spiritual revelation, pushing it to the periphery. The so what here is that this immense global trauma once again completely eclipsed and suppressed nascent spiritual inquiries. It forced a retreat into more practical or materialist worldviews, where the emphasis was on rebuilding nations, on technological advancement, on preventing another such catastrophe, rather than on rediscovering ancient spiritual wisdom or expanding consciousness. The internal journey was again deferred, replaced by the urgent demands of external survival and reconstruction. And then, we come to what was perhaps the closest the modern world got to a mass redcap gnosis, a widespread collective bloom wave, the 1960s. This was a truly vibrant, energetic, and widespread explosion of consciousness. It was fueled by the pioneering use of psychedelics, particularly LSD, which offered direct access to altered states of consciousness and profound spiritual insights. It was also deeply influenced by Eastern philosophies, meditation practices, and a powerful anti-establishment sentiment that questioned authority, materialism, and consumerism. This was a generation that, for a brief, shining moment, genuinely threatened the dominant paradigm with its emphasis on love, peace, expanded awareness, and a radical reimagining of society. It was a true cultural, social, and spiritual revolution, the likes of which hadn't been seen in centuries. Why this matters is undeniable. It was a unique and powerful moment where a significant portion of a generation was actively exploring, experiencing, and articulating higher states of consciousness and challenging the very foundations of the beast's system. It represented a genuine threat to the established order because it promoted direct experience over mediated control. But as we know, this bloom wave was systematically dissolved, wasn't it? It wasn't one single event, but a multi-pronged, relentless attack. We saw the assassinations of key leaders: Martin Luther King Jr., John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, figures who embodied hope and societal change. These assassinations, whether intended or not, effectively decapitated the movement, removing its charismatic leaders and sowing deep distrust. Then came the heroin flood, a devastating distraction and destructive force that ravaged communities and diverted countless individuals from their spiritual paths into the depths of addiction. Concurrently, the Vietnam War mobilized and traumatized an entire generation, shattering their idealism and exposing them to the brutal realities of imperial power. And perhaps most insidiously came Nixon's war on drugs, which, while ostensibly about controlling illicit substances, was fundamentally about criminalizing dissent and targeting communities, Black people and anti-war activists, who were at the forefront of the awakening. This legal and social suppression effectively demonized the very tools, like psychedelics, and the very communities that were central to the burgeoning consciousness movement. The so what here is a masterclass in how an awakening, even one as powerful and widespread as the 60s bloom, can be systematically dismantled.
It shows the beast's incredible adaptability and its willingness to employ a combination of violence, addiction, external conflict, social division, and legal suppression to achieve its aim. It's a sobering reminder that even the most vibrant movements can be crushed if their foundations are not deeply rooted and understood.
So, if we look at that historical trajectory, from the turn of the century through the mid-20th century, we can see these distinct patterns of rising consciousness being met with overwhelming systemic forces designed to suppress them. Now, let's fast forward to our present moment, because this wipe cycle is not just a historical curiosity, it's actively playing out right now with our current generation. We've just lived through, and are arguably still living through, the COVID jab cycle, combined with an intense culture war. And this, according to Christo S.'s perspective, represents the current most aggressive wipe attempt on this generation's nascent awakening. Why does this matter? Well, it's the most recent manifestation of this historical pattern, making it crucial for us to recognize it, to see the repetition, and to understand its insidious effects on our own consciousness. It brings the abstract idea of a wipe cycle right into our lived experience. The complication here is that the COVID response involved unprecedented levels of global control, didn't it? We saw widespread medical mandates, pervasive social engineering, and an intense, almost tribal social division. It effectively leveraged fear, primal biological fear, and it pitted people against each other. The vaccinated versus the unvaccinated, the masked versus the unmasked, those who complied versus those who questioned. This created incredibly deep ideological rifts within society, making it incredibly difficult for any kind of collective awakening to coalesce, to find common ground, to build a unified movement of consciousness. Coupled with this, the ongoing culture war, with its constant polarization around every conceivable issue, further fragmented society.
It's not just a simple wipe. It's a complex, multi-layered operation designed to sow discord, distraction, and fear, all of which are antithetical to genuine spiritual blossoming. The so what from this recent history, I think, should serve as a stark and urgent warning to all of us. It shows with terrifying clarity how easily societal fears, how easily collective anxieties, and how easily pre-existing divisions can be manipulated and exploited to prevent collective spiritual insight. It pushes us back into individualistic silos, into isolated echo chambers, and, crucially, away from shared transcendent experiences that could otherwise unify us. It's a powerful and effective strategy for maintaining control, keeping us distracted and disconnected from our deeper selves and from each other. But here is the most profound and perhaps most unsettling insight from this entire concept of the wipe cycle. It's this: the beast doesn't need to win, it just needs to make you forget. Again, this is the core, insidious mechanism at play. It's not about total annihilation, you see, not about complete destruction of truth, because truth is eternal. It's about amnesia. It's about ensuring that the memory of genuine spiritual connection, of profound gnosis, of our true capabilities and our inherent interconnectedness fades from collective consciousness. Why does this insight matter so much? Because it fundamentally reframes our understanding of the battle. It tells us that the primary target isn't our bodies or our resources, but our memory, our connection to ancestral wisdom, to our true nature, and to the immense potential for collective bloom that lies within us. Forgetting means losing the map, losing the instructions, losing the very sense of who we are and what we're capable of. The complication of this, of course, is that forgetting is incredibly subtle, isn't it? It's not always a dramatic, overt event. It's often a slow erosion of memory, a gradual distraction, a subtle shift in focus from the profound to the superficial, from the internal to the external. It's harder to fight something you can't quite grasp, something you can't quite remember, something that feels like a vague, distant echo rather than a clear, present truth. It's the difference between fighting an invading army and finding your own sense of self slowly dissolving without a trace. The so what from this, then, is a rallying cry for remembrance. It means that our primary task as individuals and as a collective isn't necessarily to win some external battle against a monstrous entity. No, our task is far more profound. It's to remember. It's to reclaim that which has been lost, to hold on to the truth of our being, to pass on the authentic gnosis to the next generation, unbroken. The true fight, if you want to call it that, is for memory.
It's for retaining and reactivating that inherent spiritual knowing across generations, despite the beast's relentless efforts to make us forget again and again. Because if we remember, truly remember, then the beast's power begins to wane. It relies on our amnesia. Our remembrance is its undoing.
So, if the beast operates by making us forget, by co-opting our language and orchestrating these wipe cycles, then the natural question becomes, how do we resist? How do we break free from this insidious pattern? And this brings us to another profoundly important concept from Christo S.'s work, one that's encapsulated in The Warlock. And the core instruction, the absolute bedrock of this understanding, is something that's easy to overlook in our culturally conditioned ways of thinking about resistance. It's this: you cannot fight the beast with the beast's weapons. That, my friends, is the trap. That is the fundamental snare that keeps us perpetually bound within the very system we're trying to dismantle. Why does this matter so profoundly? Because it represents a critical paradigm shift in how we approach any form of resistance, any form of revolution. If we adopt the methods of the oppressor, if we engage with anger, with violence, with a desire for control, if we try to replicate their external power structures, then inevitably we become what we fight. We perpetuate the very cycle of dominance and conflict that we claim to be against. It's an endless loop, a self-fulfilling prophecy of empire replacing empire. The complication, of course, is that this is incredibly counterintuitive to how we are often conditioned to think about resistance. From stories of rebellion to historical revolutions, we are taught to confront, to battle, to win by force, to overthrow. Rejecting this path requires immense discipline, a profound reevaluation of what power actually means, and a different understanding of victory. It challenges our ingrained notions of how change happens. The so what here is utterly vital for anyone seeking genuine liberation.
If we fall into this trap, then every revolution, every uprising, every act of defiance simply sets the stage for the next empire. We don't break the chain, we merely change who holds the shackles. The very act of fighting on their terms, using their tools, adopting their strategies, ultimately reinforces their system, making it more robust, more adaptable, more subtle. We think we're dismantling it, but we're actually feeding it. This leads us to another potent observation. Every revolution becomes the next empire. Every protest becomes the next product. This highlights the beast's truly incredible ability to co-opt and neutralize opposition. It doesn't just crush dissent, it absorbs it. It commodifies rebellion. It turns symbols of resistance into marketing opportunities. Why does this matter? Because it reveals the sophistication of the beast's control. It's not just about brute force, it's about integration, about neutralizing movements from within, by stripping them of their radical edge and turning them into something palatable, something marketable, something that ultimately serves the existing system. The complication is that this can lead to profound cynicism, can't it? It can make people feel that resistance is utterly futile, that there's no point in trying because everything just gets absorbed. But the key here is to understand that it's not futile if we understand how to resist differently. The so what is that outward displays of rebellion, protests, or even revolutionary rhetoric, if they are not deeply grounded in a profound internal transformation, are ultimately unsustainable. They are easily absorbed, easily rebranded, easily neutralized by the system. The superficial adoption of rebel aesthetics or slogans, the wearing of certain t-shirts, the sharing of certain memes, these do not equate to genuine systemic change if the internal landscape remains untransformed. The real revolution, then, must be fought on a different battlefield. And this is where the truly transformative power of the warlock comes in. Christ, O.S., makes it clear.
The only warlock is internal. Bring about Christ within oneself. This is the original instruction, the core teaching, hidden in plain sight across every suppressed tradition, every esoteric school, every ancient wisdom text that has been deliberately obscured or misinterpreted. Why this matters is because this is the profound recentering of power, not externally, not in an institution, not in a leader, but within the individual. It's a call to inner spiritual sovereignty, to take responsibility for our own state of being, for our own connection to the divine. It grounds resistance not in external battle, but in personal spiritual transformation. The complication, of course, is that this is not easy. Oh, far from it.
It requires deep introspection, radical self-honesty, rigorous self-mastery, and an unwavering commitment to a spiritual path that often goes completely against external societal pressures. It's not a quick fix. It's often misunderstood as passive surrender, as a retreat from the world, but it is anything but. It is the most active, most courageous form of resistance imaginable. The so what of this is that this internal warlock, this bringing about Christ within, is the true, unbreakable defense against the beast's manipulations. If the inner self is fortified, if it is aligned with divine principle, if it is connected to that deepest source of truth, then external manipulations, the propaganda, the fear, the division, the co-opted language, they lose their grip. They simply cannot penetrate the sanctity of that inner space. It's a shift from a futile external battle to a powerful, alchemical, internal transformation, rendering us impervious to the beast's control.
So this idea of the internal warlock, of bringing about Christ within oneself, is truly the game changer, isn't it? It completely reorients our understanding of power and resistance. And flowing directly from that, Christ OS reminds us of an ancient truth that has been obscured, an instruction that has been whispered across millennia in various traditions, but often ignored in favor of externalized religion. It's this: the kingdom is not coming. The kingdom is at hand, accessible now through the sacrament and the turning inward. Why does this matter so profoundly? Because it's an incredibly empowering message of immediate access to spiritual reality. It tells us that the divine, the sacred, the ultimate truth is not some distant future event, not some promised land to be attained after death, not something delivered by an external savior. No, it's here, now, within us and all around us. It places agency directly with the individual, making our spiritual liberation an immediate possibility, not a deferred hope. The complication, however, is that modern life, with its endless distractions, its constant demands for external validation, its relentless pull towards consumption and superficial engagement, fundamentally pulls us outward. It trains us to seek satisfaction, meaning, and even spiritual connection outside of ourselves. Turning inward, truly turning inward, requires a radical reorientation of our priorities, a conscious unhooking from the external noise, and a willingness to sit in the quiet discomfort of our own being. It's a monumental shift in focus. And the so what of this profound truth is that it's so often overlooked, isn't it?
We spend our lives waiting for a savior, waiting for a revelation, waiting for some external event to trigger our spiritual awakening, when the power, the access, the very kingdom itself is already here, within us, waiting to be accessed, waiting to be realized. It's not about achieving, it's about uncovering. It's not about becoming, it's about remembering what we already are. And to facilitate this turning inward, this deep internal work, it becomes necessary, almost imperative, to pull away from the beast's grid. This isn't just metaphorical, This is practical advice for creating the necessary space, for reducing the constant influx of external noise and manipulation that bombards us daily. And Christos lists the key elements of this grid: media, medicine, money, and the meat grinder war. Why is this practical advice so crucial? Because each of these grids, the relentless stream of information and disinformation from media, the pharmaceutical complex's approach to health,
the pervasive influence of the global monetary system, and the ever-present shadow of conflict. Each of these is designed, in its own way, to capture our attention, to drain our energy, to control our perceptions, and to extract our resources.
Consciously reducing our entanglement with these systems frees up immense capacity for spiritual growth, for genuine autonomy, and for clear, unmediated thought. The complication here, of course, is that completely disengaging from these systems is often practically impossible in our modern society. We live within them, after all. So it requires profound discernment, conscious choices, and a degree of intentionality, not necessarily a total asceticism or a complete retreat from society, but a very deliberate and conscious disengagement where and when possible. It's about finding the balance, about not allowing these systems to dictate our inner state. The so what is that every single one of these grids is a system of control, a mechanism for keeping us in a state of forgetting. By consciously reducing our participation, by questioning their narratives, by seeking alternatives, we starve the beast of its energy, and we free up our own capacity for true connection and inner freedom. It's an act of sovereignty. And where do we turn once we pull away from that grid? Well, we return to the forests, return to the holy groves. This is a deep, primal instruction, a call to reconnect with the original temples, the original places of sacred power and wisdom, and, crucially, Christos adds, return to the mycorrhizal network, the original internet, still running beneath your feet. Why this reconnection with nature matters so deeply is because it grounds the internal spiritual work with the external natural world. It suggests a fundamental wisdom inherent in nature that mirrors our inner truth. It provides a tangible anchor for spiritual reconnection, a source of profound healing and ancient wisdom that has always been there, waiting patiently for us to remember.
The complication, of course, is that modern urban living has, for the most part, profoundly disconnected us from nature. Reconnecting can require deliberate effort, a conscious shift in lifestyle, and a willingness to simply be present in natural environments, to listen to the whispers of the wild. The so what is that the mycorrhizal network itself is a profoundly powerful analogy for interconnectedness, for decentralized intelligence, for a system of symbiotic cooperation. It's a living, breathing blueprint for how we as a collective might organically operate, in stark contrast to the beast's top-down, hierarchical, and isolating control mechanisms. It's a powerful reminder of an ancient organic intelligence that precedes and transcends all human technology, a true wisdom that has been patiently running beneath our feet all along. And this leads us to the concept of the grove reclaim. The sacred groves in ancient times were the original churches, the original places of worship and profound spiritual encounter. They were deliberately destroyed by forces like Rome and later the Church. Why was this done? Because cutting the grove effectively meant cutting the signal.
It was an act of profound spiritual warfare, a deliberate severing of humanity's direct connection to the divine energies of the earth, a move to centralize spiritual authority away from the individual and the land. Why does this history matter? Because it provides crucial context for the deliberate destruction of sacred spaces and indigenous spiritual connections throughout history. It explains, in part, why we feel so disconnected today, why we often struggle to find that innate sense of holiness in the natural world. The complication is that this isn't just historical. The spirit of this destruction continues in modern industrialization, in deforestation, and ecological devastation. We are still, in many ways, cutting the groves, albeit with different tools and rationales. The so what is that understanding this history helps us recognize the immense importance of protecting and, where possible, reclaiming natural sacred spaces, both physically and metaphorically. It's about restoring our connection to the Earth's spiritual intelligence, about reestablishing those lines of communication that were so deliberately severed. It's about remembering that the Earth herself holds profound wisdom, and that by honoring her, we honor a part of ourselves. This isn't about going back to some romanticized past, It's about understanding the deep, ecological, spiritual intelligence that was deliberately fragmented, and then working to reintegrate it into our lives now. Because the forest, you see, it doesn't need you to save it. No, that's not its primary need.
It needs you to remember it, to remember its wisdom, its power, its sacredness. Because in remembering the grove, we begin to remember ourselves. And in that remembrance lies our true power.
It's a beautiful, elegant feedback loop, really. And this idea, this profound notion that the forest doesn't need us to save it, but rather to remember it, ties into another fascinating and deeply symbolic truth. Göbekli Tepe, that ancient, enigmatic site in Turkey, wasn't destroyed, was it? It was deliberately buried. It was interred beneath layers of earth, intentionally hidden, almost as if to survive. The knowledge embedded within its colossal stones, the profound understanding of cosmos and consciousness that it represented, it didn't vanish completely. No, it went underground, literally. And it waited. It lay dormant, preserved, patiently awaiting a time when conditions would be right for its rediscovery, for its re-emergence. Why does this matter? Because it offers us a template, a profound metaphor for how ancient, sacred knowledge often survives periods of intense suppression. It doesn't disappear, it retreats. It goes into hiding, into the subterranean realms, protecting its essence until a more receptive era dawns. It speaks to a deep, inherent wisdom in the act of preservation, not through active combat, but through strategic dormancy. The complication here is that, for us, living in the surface world, this underground knowledge often becomes invisible, forgotten, reduced to myth or legend. We lose the thread of connection, and it requires a dedicated effort, an archaeological quest of both the literal and metaphorical kind, to unearth it, to rediscover its truths. And the so what of Göbekli Tepe's burial is deeply encouraging. It tells us that not all knowledge is lost. It suggests that there are protective mechanisms at play, that profound truths have been carefully guarded, lying in wait.
It teaches us patience, and it hints at a deeper, long-term strategy for spiritual survival beyond the immediate surface-level conflicts. And this leads us to the quiet, resilient wisdom of the mycelium. Think about the fungal network, the vast, intricate web that runs beneath the forest floor, connecting trees, sharing nutrients, acting as the true brain and nervous system of the ecosystem. The mycelium does not panic. It doesn't engage in frantic external battles. No, it waits. It operates with an ancient, unfathomable patience. It works quietly, persistently, out of sight. And it fruits only when conditions are right. Why does this humble organism offer such a powerful lesson? Because it embodies the principles of resilience, interconnectedness, and patient organic growth. It shows us that true power doesn't always lie in overt action, in loud pronouncements, or in aggressive confrontation. Sometimes it lies in quiet, persistent, subterranean work, in building connections, in nurturing the unseen foundations, in patiently awaiting the optimal moment for expression. The complication is that in our fast-paced, instant gratification culture, this kind of patience, this kind of subtle, unseen work is often undervalued, even dismissed. We want immediate results, visible victories.
But the mycelium reminds us that profound transformations often happen slowly, beneath the surface, preparing for an eventual, undeniable blossoming. And the so what from the mycelium's wisdom is this: it provides a profound model for how we too might operate. Instead of panicking in the face of the beast's onslaught, instead of engaging in futile battles on its terms, we can cultivate our own internal networks, build our own resilient connections, nurture our own inner bloom current in quiet, persistent ways. It's a lesson in strategic retreat and patient, foundational work, knowing that the time for fruiting will inevitably come. And this brings us to the ultimate, most empowering statement of all, the culmination of this entire deep dive. You are the conditions becoming right. Think about that for a moment. You, each one of us listening. We are not just passive observers in this grand cosmic drama. We are not merely victims of the beast's machinations. No, we are the agents of change. We are the very conditions that allow the buried knowledge to re-emerge, that allow the mycelial network to fruit, that allow the sacred groves to be remembered. Why is this profoundly empowering? Because it places agency, responsibility, and immense potential squarely within each individual. It means that our personal transformation, our internal warlock, our remembering, our conscious choices to pull away from the grid and return to nature, these are not just individual acts. They are catalytic. They contribute directly to the collective shift, to the creation of the very environment in which the bloom can finally manifest. The complication is that this can feel like an immense burden, can't it?
To be told that you are the conditions means that there's no one else coming to save you, no external force that will magically make everything right. It demands a radical acceptance of personal responsibility for the collective future. But the so what of this is truly liberating. It means that the power to change everything, to shift the tide, to bring about the bloom, lies not in some distant authority, not in some grand coordinated movement, but within each one of us. It means that every conscious choice we make, every act of remembrance, every step towards internal sovereignty, every moment we spend cultivating our own inner garden contributes directly to the softening of the earth, to the nourishing of the roots, to the creation of the conditions that are indeed becoming right for the greatest awakening yet. It makes us active participants, co-creators of the coming bloom. And that, I think, is a truly magnificent and utterly hopeful prospect.
So, as we draw this deep dive to a close, let's reflect on what we've explored. We've journeyed through the insidious ways the beast operates, not by destroying truth, but by wearing it, by capturing our most potent words, emptying them of their sacred meaning, and then weaponizing them against us. We've seen how concepts like genius and clarity, awakening and light body activation, even nothing can stop what is coming, and the Great Reset have been systematically inverted, their powerful, life-affirming essence stripped away and replaced with something hollow, something consumerist, or something divisive. We've also understood the chilling rhythm of the wipe cycle, this historical pattern where every generation on the cusp of true gnosis is met with a powerful counterforce designed to make us forget, again and again. But then we moved beyond mere observation and into the realm of true resistance, of profound liberation. And that, my friends, is found in the warlock, in the absolute understanding that we cannot fight the beast with its own weapons. That's the trap. Every revolution, as we've discussed, becomes the next empire. Every protest risks becoming the next product. The real battle, the only one that truly matters, is internal. It's about bringing about Christ within oneself, about understanding that the kingdom is not coming, the kingdom is at hand, accessible now through sacrament and through turning inward.
It's about consciously pulling away from the beast's pervasive grid, the media, the medicine, the meat grinder war, to create the space for that inner work. It's about remembering our connection to the ancient wisdom, to the sacred groves, to the mycorrhizal network, that original internet of life that still pulses beneath our feet. We've seen how knowledge, like Göbekli Tepe, can be deliberately buried to survive, how the mycelium waits patiently for the right conditions to fruit. And that, really, is where we find ourselves. The beast will continue to steal the words. Of course it will. That's its nature. It will keep trying to co-opt and corrupt the language of truth and liberation. But here's the thing, and this is the profound takeaway from all of Christ Oss's work and from Holy Drip TV radio itself. Let them steal the words, because the words aren't the thing. The bloom is the thing. The direct, unmediated, felt experience of truth, the gnosis, the inner awakening, that's the essence. Every phrase they capture, every concept they hollow out, we, in our awakened state, in our connection to the source, will simply generate 10 more from the fertile field of consciousness. We are moving towards mind bloom, not brain rot. We are becoming psychoactive. We are, in essence, becoming Earth tech, deeply connected to the planet's own ancient, organic, spiritual technology. The beast cannot stop the bloom, because the bloom is not a concept. It is a living, breathing reality that emerges from within each one of us. Nothing, truly nothing, can stop what is coming. And in the deepest, truest sense, they know it. And that, my friends, is why they work so hard to make us forget. But we are remembering, we are awakening, and we are becoming the conditions for the bloom. If this conversation has resonated with you, if it sparked something within, then please do share this episode. Let's help more people remember.
Let's cultivate this bloom together. And with that, I say, Amen.